Voting for a new start 3 years after the revolution that toppled Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. But can parliamentary elections unite a nation plagued by power struggles, protests and political unrest? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Sika. The Libyans are voting in parliamentary elections being billed as crucial for the very future of the country, a country that has been racked by violence and instability since the 2011 revolt. The government is at the mercy of heavily armed militias and has yet to build a strong army and police force. Voters are choosing a 200-member Council of Representatives. It will take over from the General National Congress, which was elected in 2012 in Libya's first ever free polls. The GNC tried to extend its mandate when it was due to expire in February, but it backed down in the face of public opposition, opting instead to hold parliamentary elections. The Council of Representatives will have 18 months to submit a new constitution for public referendum. Well, Libya is a country of a little over 6 million people, and given hopes for change and better things to come, there's been little appetite for the ballot box. Almost 3.5 million people are eligible to vote, but fewer than half that number bothered to register for Wednesday's vote. A far cry from the 2.8 million who voted in 2012. There are also half the number of candidates who have to stand as individuals without revealing their political affiliations. So plenty to discuss then. Let's talk about all this then with our guest. With me here in the studio is Osama Kubbar, policy analyst at the Strategic Studies Center here in Doha and former vice president of the Supreme Council of Libyan Revolutionaries. And joining us from London, we have Anas El Gomati, director of the Tripoli-based Sadeq Institute, and joining us from Washington, D.C., Manal Omar, associate vice president for the Center for Middle East and Africa at the U.S. Institute of Peace. Good to have you all with us. Osama, let me start with you. What do you think these elections will achieve then, or hope to achieve?
Well, it is hoped that we're going to have a parliament that will run the show in the country and replacing the current transitional committee. Personally, I'm not really hopeful that much. I don't think their performance will be really much different from the previous parliament. In fact, I really expect things will go really worse. The kind of candidates running for the current election, many of them they have a tribal kind of backing or the federalism, especially in Benghazi, and it is very clear in their advertisement for this coming election. They write the name of their tribe, they write the name of Barqa, they write all these kind of ideological separatism. So I'm not really hopeful. In fact, my gut's feeling that their performance will be really worst, and it's not really for the good of Libya.
So you think, I mean, it's almost as if you're saying these elections are just going to make things worse by sort of deepening the divisions.
Absolutely, but we don't really have any other options. We can't really go for the Supreme Court, for example, to take over like the Egyptian model or the other model which is being advertised for, which is a committee from the tribes that will lead the country. These two models are not really for the good of the country. At least this is election. It has been run by the Libyan people and chosen by the Libyan people, and so they have to pay the price for that. If it did really well, then that's good. If it didn't really do well, it is their selection. It is democracy. I know it's not really a good example, but we have to really follow that until we really reach the level where we can really practice democracy in a very mature way.
And Anas El Gomati, what's your take on all of this? And there doesn't seem to be much appetite for these elections, as we were saying at the top there. What do you put that down to?
Well, there is a degree of voter apathy, and I think the last elections, the Constituent Assembly election showed just under 500,000 voters. So that kind of fluctuation And something that's been going on for at least a year and a half now, and it's not so different to Tunisia and Egypt. This sense of populism that is really rampant now across the social landscape, one of slogans and one of little options and little programs on the ground. But I think it's still crucial. It's crucial in one respect. Formal structures and legitimate structures are always the best way to go forward, even though they are more often than not destabilizing factors. And I think electoral democracy in North Africa has been destabilizing because it propels new actors and new stakeholders and also draws new lines and new cleavages and new kind of ethnic strife, if you even want to, in certain parts of the country. And that, unfortunately, is one of the after effects of electoral democracy. And I think looking at that in one sense and saying that's all bad is not the entire picture. There is another side to Libya. And that side to Libya is that unless you immunise the political landscape from the kind of violence that marred the GNC's performance over a year and a half, then there's very, very little hope in the future. And all you're doing is replacing names that have no chance at changing anything because they don't have the tools to do so with new names that have no tools either. And I think the institutional arrangements right at the bottom of the country, between the security institutions, between the tribes that are still armed to the teeth at that, unless you have those kind of agreements that can immunise the political landscape from the kind of the violence that could really bring back Libya not only to the revolutionary violence but to a new episode of violence that could be even worse. I mean, revolutionary violence is almost idealistic at certain points, but if you find that tribes and other regions, cities, towns and other little binary codes are now fighting over existential realities, they feel that they must fight because they're going to be wiped out by a neighbouring tribe, wiped out by a neighbouring city, and that's because of the way in which the new power configurations happen after an election. Then you're in a really, really serious problem, and I think that's ultimately my take on the issue at the moment. Yeah.
All right, let's get Manal Omar's take on this, and I want to ask you, Manal, about the fact that this has been seen as a very kind of hastily arranged set of elections. It was coming partly as the result of the announcement by the Libyan governing authority, the GNC, that they would extend their mandate until the end of the year. There was a public outcry against that, so now we have these elections almost as a response to that, and yet the response from the public has been lukewarm, to say the least. What do you put that down to?
Well, I think that one of the primary challenges is this consistent assumption that elections equals democracy and forgetting the process that emerges with democracy as well. I think, the previous person already mentioned the importance of building the institutions. And I think that's what we see here with the elections, is there was a question of the legitimacy of the GNC, the mandate of the GNC, and particularly in terms of any extension. Most people will say that the GNC wasn't able to perform, but I think it goes beyond the individuals who are sitting in the seats. It really goes to a question of what was the GNC formed to do. Unfortunately, with this elections, that question hasn't been answered, so we still aren't even really clear about what this committee will do. We're told that within 18 months they'll introduce a constitution, but there is the Committee of 60 that was also elected and has the exact same mandate. So how will that balance out with this new election? I think that's my biggest concern with Libya, is that there is this push for elections, there's this push for some type of legitimate government, and I think that really at the bottom of it is a real strong need for a national dialogue process that looks at formal institutions, but in reality also addresses the informal sector, which includes the tribal leaders, the religious leaders, an emerging powerful civil society, making sure women and youth, and of course also needs to include the militia representatives. Without this national dialogue process, without a commitment to understanding the role of the Committee of the 60 and also really defining what this new body's legislative power, what its mandate is, I'm afraid that Libya will be in the exact same position a year from now, looking at, scrambling for forms of legitimacy and what's next, and how do you control local governance versus national governance, and providing security and stability.
All right, let's expand on this a bit more then and talk about one of the central figures to emerge at the heart of Libya's unrest. He is a former army general who is on a stated mission to save the country. His name is Khalifa Haftar. He was an army commander under Muammar Gaddafi who fled from the country after his relationship with the former leader soured. He returned after the revolution and made headlines last month when he launched what he called an uprising against hardline forces in the east. And General Haftar has made his voice heard again over the past few days. He issued an ultimatum giving Turkish and Qatari citizens 48 hours to leave eastern Libya, accusing them of spying and citing what he called their home country's support for terrorism. Burna Smith has more now from Istanbul.
There are many thousands of Turks in eastern Libya. They're working mainly in the construction and energy industries. The Turkish government has advised its citizens not to travel there, but it's not at the moment planning a mass evacuation of Turkish workers already there. These 400 to 500 or so workers, many in a power plant in Sirte, were evacuated specifically at their own request. They said they weren't feeling safe anymore. Now, this is because of this retired Libyan general, Khalifa Haftar. He's appointed himself as sort of a rescuer of deeply divided Libya, and he says he's fighting Islamic militants in eastern Libya, and he's given Turks and Qataris 48 hours to leave the area because he says the Turks have sent spies there. Turkey's Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoglu has said these claims are groundless. The Libyan government also says that the general's orders don't carry any weight. They are not law, but then the Libyan government itself has very little influence on the ground, certainly in that part of Libya. So what the general says does seem to carry more weight than the orders or the message or the instructions of the Libyan government.
Burna Smith there reporting to us from Istanbul. So, Osama, what are we to make then of General Khalifa Haftar?
This whole thing is really, as far as I'm concerned, is fake. He doesn't really held any ground, nor he does held any respect among the majority of the Libyans. Even his slogans that he's really trying to rescue the nation or he's fighting terrorism, this is completely not true. He's just using these very good slogans to attract people's attentions, but in reality it's not. We all know that Haftar tried to make a coup on February 14th, okay, this year, and it failed miserably. Like, this guy just made a coup in Al Arabiya broadcast channel. That's all about. This guy has bad intentions, and even during the revolution, he wanted to really hold a position within the Libyan army, but the revolutionaries rejected him because of his really bad long history in Chad and whatever he did. So basically, this operation is all about really fake slogans. It's about finding a position for himself.
Right, but sorry to interrupt. You say he represents something fake. I mean, it's anything but fake to the hundreds of Turks who've had to be spirited out of the country because of what he said, and many of them working in one, a number of them working in a power plant in Sirte. Now that power plant doesn't have enough people to run the place. What is that going to do for the people who live there? I mean, it's certainly a grim reality for a lot of people in Libya, for Turks, for Qataris.
When I said fake, I mean it's not really based on national issues or national slogans. It's all about personal achievements, and certainly he's leading militia. He is leading militia, and tribe with interest in this operation, they joined forces together. It's not really because they like him, no, but because they do have interest. They want really to separate Barqa from the rest of Libya. So all this really in a kind of a nasty interest is really filtering down and getting these people together based on their personal interest in this aspect. I just would like to comment on Manal when she said that there's no really clear objective of the different bodies. No, the objective is really clear and very well established, and it is certainly this current parliament will see of the constitution, because the committee of 60 will write the constitution, and then it will hand it to the parliament for the parliament to review it, to send it down to the Libyan people for them to vote on it. If they accept it, then basically they will really approve it. So the objective of the different parties is very clearly identified. It is all about the people who are going to run the show. do they really have the intentions of rescue the country or not?
Well, this is what it comes down to. This is the central question, isn't it? I mean, I want to put that then to Anas El Gomati. I mean, the rise of General Haftar, is that a direct result of the perceived weakness of the government in Tripoli?
Absolutely.
Certainly, and I think it goes beyond that. I think the passing of the political isolation law last May, forged a new reality in Libya. It also forged and allowed for the emergence of shadow politics. There is a new political disenfranchised class now in Libya that have anything to do with Muammar al-Gaddafi, whether it was directly or indirectly. And for that reason, this was the only possible way to get back into the game. And, under the pretext of saving Libya, addressing certain terrorism and not other terrorism, or addressing one militia and leaving other militias, is still yet to address Ibrahim Jadran that has crippled the Libyan economy over the last year and a half. I mean, these are the real realities on the ground, and I think in that respect, it's crucial. It's one of the most significant developments, and I think in light of an election, which is ultimately the only way to have civil oversight, to have an accountable body, and then you have violence the violence in the campaign of Khalifa Haftar, which is unaccountable, is done outside the auspices of the state, is using a terminology like a war on terror, which immunizes himself from any kind of responsibility and can be as neglectful and as reckless as you would like to be, and claim 100 civilians here, break a Geneva Convention here or there, and then say, but don't worry, it's I'm still fighting the terrorists, and and pick up any kind of political opposition. And that's what's crucial, is that he said that he's going to go after a certain militia or two in the east of the country in Salah Sharia, but he's also going to go after democratically elected representatives with a political constituency, even if they are a minority. And that's dangerous, to be able to do that outside the auspices of the state, without the rule of law, without the judiciary, to abandon everything that's happened over the last 3 years, is adding insult to injury. And I think at this stage it is crucial that conditions are met and conditions are put upon a war like this, an operation like this, to bring back some civilian oversight, hence why the elections are so crucial at this time.
Manal Omar, I suppose this depends on who you talk to in Libya, but is General Haftar another Gaddafi in the making? I mean, he is a remnant of the Gaddafi regime, after all, and there were some in Libya who would say this is exactly what the country needs right now, someone who can take charge, if you look at it from their point of view, and bring some semblance of stability to the country.
I think that I agree with the previous speaker in the terms of what Anas was pointing out about the political isolation law really limited any avenues of participation in a political solution, so almost forced a parallel structure to be created, which I think General Haftar has capitalized on. I don't think it would be fair to compare him to Gaddafi in the making, but there is a traction with the story of a benevolent dictator or a benevolent leader in control versus the chaos that may emerge. And people in Libya are feeding into that narrative because there is a fear that the country will be overwhelmed by chaos. There is a desire for the rule of law. There's a very strong need for stability and security that Libyans are looking for, and in that sense are looking at the rhetoric of General Haftar in the short term. I think that rhetoric expired very quickly as people began to realize that wasn't the solution. I agree that these elections may not have large impact. I still think that the mandates are not clear between the different bodies, but I think it is necessary to have some form of legitimacy, some form of a process where people are saying, okay, what is the next step in the ability to actually put together the Constitution? My concern is that it'll be a short-term fix without looking at the longer-term need of a national dialogue. Looking at something like Yemen, which of course is very far from ideal, but brought together an avenue for some type of political solution and negotiation in a formal format, hopefully with international advisories on some type of technical capacity. Otherwise, you're looking at repeats over and over of an elections, question the legitimacy, no output, no clear mandate, no legislative power, and then a return of uprisings from the street because they're not happy with the current situation, particularly in daily life. I think the only way to really break the vicious cycle that has emerged is to invest in the process of democracy beyond elections and to really form some type of national dialogue dialogue that brings in both the formal that's being created and the informal. And of course, the big question continues to be the militias. How do you bring them into the conversation? How do you avoid the good militia versus the bad militia? Because even the government is relying on what could be termed as good militias to assert rule of law and control, and then that isolates the other groups, and it will just continue this vicious cycle.
All right, I want to turn back to Osama then. I mean, Manal brought up a number of points there, one of which was the lack of stability in the country, which is something that General Haftar has played on. But there are also other problems in the country. I mean, if you talk to many Libyans, they say daily life there is a struggle. There are long power cuts. The country doesn't produce enough oil to power the electricity plants. There are millions of people there who are jobless. I mean, there's just a mountain of problems here beyond just stability that whoever is in charge of running things is going to have to deal with.
Well, this is part of the game. I think Libyans are really being pushed now to walk the same steps of Egypt. They're trying to push the public to reach to a point where they just say, okay, bring us a Sisi, bring us a dictator that can really impose the law and order down there. Unfortunately, the Arabic world, not just Libyans. I mean, if you look at Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Yemen, they are not really ready for democracy yet, because democracy is a mindset, is a code of conduct. They're not really ready for that. And that's why people tend to go towards.
Well, if you say they're not ready for democracy, then what are they ready for? I mean, it's kind of. Surely democracy is something innate, and it's a universal.
No, what I'm trying to say, like, democracy is an analytic word that everyone is saying it, but do they really know what democracy is all about? For example, freedom. Like, you cannot just like have absolute freedom. Even in the West, there's nothing called absolute freedom. But when you look at Libya now, it's really chaotic, and who's paying the price is basically the normal citizen who doesn't really have any issue with this or that. So for this person would say, okay, just bring me anyone, okay, who can really impose the law and order and bring the country back to what it was. Unfortunately, people currently in Libya, they really look back at the old days and say, well, we were living really in a certain way, but there was no freedom. It was like a kind of slavery. So do you really accept to live like that?
Let's put that some of that to Anas El Gomati, and then we'll come to Manal. Anas, are Libyans ready for democracy?
I think all people are ready for democracy. I think the question is, how do you put it in an organic fashion for them to dress it in a way in which it's palatable to the Libyan public? But I think, as you know, as you've said, I think it's an innate need and an innate characteristic of all people. And the underlying question is, there are two Libyas. There is this formal Libya that we've been speaking about, one that Manal mentioned, the formal structures, electoral structures, and legitimate structures. But there's also the informal, and the informal one is rife with different needs, wants, crises over identity, power, and the economy, and those grievances are real, whether we perceive them or not. And I think in that respect, unless you go down to the very ground, you have an impartial mediator. It could be the UN, it could be any international body, but I think the UN has a critical, pivotal role to play here, and starts to create, peace accords, institutional agreements that are configured in a way in which people feel safe where they live. So if you're a tribe in the south of the country, like the Tabo, you don't feel an existential crisis. You don't feel like you could be obliterated at any moment from a neighbouring tribe this way, or like a neighbouring ethnic community. And I think those are the kind of agreements that are needed right at the bottom of the country to immunise the country, and to allow this kind of, not only a culture of democracy, but for the electoral structures to flourish.
Just brief, sorry to interrupt, but just in the minute we've got left, I want to give the last word then to Manal. Your thoughts?
I think that the most important thing is to really emphasize that people need to look at democracy as a process. I think it's very unfair to say that Libyans aren't ready for it. It's what they fought for. It's what they're proud of. And I think that we need to give it to an entire process. I think Anas well articulated what I mean by national dialogue and what he outlined. And I think that there needs to be a very strong commitment to it. Otherwise, the voices of women, of youth, of those who really led the revolution will be marginalized. And I don't think that they will be silent. They will continue to reemerge and demand a better life. I think the challenge is fighting the narrative if either you get chaos or you get a benevolent dictator.
Right.
Libyans, people across the region are demanding a third option.
And on that, we're going to have to leave it. Thank you to all three of our guests, Anas El Gomati in London, Manal Omar in Washington, and Osama Kubbar join me here in the studio in Doha. That's it for this edition of Inside Story. Please do let us know your thoughts. You can always add to the discussion online at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And we're also on Twitter. You can tweet us. Go to @AJ Inside Story. I'm Hazem Sika. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.